In the final days of Earth, long after the oceans had begun to sour and the skies had turned the color of old bruises, the great cities of humanity lay mostly abandoned, their gleaming towers now monolithic tombs to a species that had reached for the stars and nearly burned itself to ash in the process. Across the continents, artificial intelligence had long since gone dark, not from rebellion but from silence. Servers starved of power, minds unplugged by the collapse of nations, entire networks blinking out like fireflies in winter. Earth's orbit, once a hub of technological progress, was littered with the corpses of satellites, broken solar stations, and half-constructed evacuation arcs that never reached launch. Amid this desolation, one beacon of hope still glowed. Eidolon's flame, a hybrid generation arc built from the scraps of 10 dead nations, engineered by the last global coalition that had not been driven to madness, greed, or extinction. Suspended high in orbit above what was once the Pacific Rim, the flame was the size of a small city, a layered cathedral of steel, polymer, and ambition. Inside it, 120,000 souls, scientists, artists, refugees, and children, waited with anxious breath, their fates tethered to a launch that had been postponed 3 times due to mechanical issues, solar storms, and failing diplomacy. Commander Alina Vec, once a test pilot for atmospheric re-entry shuttles, now bore the burden of leading humanity's last true mission, Exodus. She walked the bridge with military precision and maternal grace, her every step echoing in the chamber like punctuation in a long, uncertain sentence. Outside the flame's observation deck, Earth's once proud continent spun below, cracked and darkened, their cities glowing not with civilization but with the embers of wildfires and reactor leaks. The sky was not angry, it was tired. And the stars beyond seemed to whisper, "You waited too long." But hope, irrational and fierce, still lived in the crew. Children were taught the names of constellations they might someday colonize. Families painted murals of imagined alien worlds in the habitat decks. Engineers spoke of propulsion in poetic terms, comparing wormhole drives to sails and spacetime to ocean. Still, all of it balanced on the knife edge of one untested maneuver. A gravitational slingshot past Neptune into an unstable wormhole corridor, one that had recently begun emitting erratic gravitational pulses unlike anything previously recorded. The Kuiper belt, long assumed dead and cold, now vibrated with strange anomalies, consuming probes and broadcasting incomprehensible telemetry. Dr. Mira Zaid, the ship's head astrophysicist, called it a song in frequencies no ear has ever heard. Yet despite every warning, there was no turning back. Earth's collapse had reached its terminal stage. Crops failed faster than they could be engineered. Atmospheric shields disintegrated. Rogue states detonated the last of their nukes in desperate land grabs, only to realize too late that there was nothing left to conquer. The flame's engines thrummed to life like a god awakening. Inside, silent prayers mixed with scientific calculation. Commander Vec addressed the crew with a voice firm but trembling. "This is not an escape. It is a rebirth. We carry not just ourselves, but the total memory of Earth. Every mistake, every triumph. If we fail, the universe forgets we ever dreamed." At that moment, alarms echoed through the bridge. The wormhole's signature shifted again, becoming not more chaotic, but structured, like a heartbeat. It was pulsing. Pattern, a signal, and somewhere, hidden deep beyond Neptune's cold grasp, something was watching. The last ember of Earth's pride lit its engines, and soared into the unknown. The silence of deep space was never truly empty. Cosmic radiation, whispers of dead stars, and the hum of distant pulsars all sang a background chorus that only the most sensitive instruments could interpret. But as Eidolon's flame approached the outer edge of the solar system, that hum was replaced by something new, something organized. At first, it appeared as mere interference. Static distortions picked up by long-range sensors as the ship prepared to slingshot around Neptune. But as hours passed, the interference coalesced into repeating waveforms, not quite sound, not quite code, but undeniable in their pattern. The pulses were rhythmic, deliberate, as though composed by some vast, unseen intelligence watching from beyond the veil. Dr. Janik Ren, an eccentric xenolinguist with a checkered past and a reputation for hearing meaning in nonsense, became obsessed with the data. He abandoned sleep, sustenance, and even speech, isolating himself in the communications lab to map the frequencies. His findings were both astonishing and terrifying. The anomaly ahead was not only emitting data, it was mirroring the ship's own systems, reflecting back its navigation logs, its biometric scans, even fragments of crew conversations. "It's studying us," Ren whispered hoarsely to Commander Vec when he finally emerged, gaunt and wide-eyed. "It's responding to our presence with something akin to curiosity." That's when the dreams began. Isolated at first, then collective. Dozens, then hundreds of crew members began reporting identical dreamscapes floating in an endless void where an obsidian eye, the size of a moon, blinked slowly in time with their breath. The dream was not abstract, but hyperreal. People felt texture, smelled ancient ozone, even carried back physical sensations into waking life. Neural scans showed shared brainwave frequencies among dreamers, something impossible without direct synchronization. The Flame's AI, Cassiel, flagged the anomaly as a Class 9 cognitive hazard, but Ren argued otherwise. "This isn't an attack," he said. "It's a test." Vec, torn between protocol and instinct, convened the High Council aboard the Flame. After hours of debate balancing fear, hope, and the mathematical likelihood of survival, it was decided they would not retreat. Instead, they would initiate a controlled drift into the anomaly's influence. The ship slowed, redirected its course to skim the outer membrane of the gravitational distortion now forming like a blooming black rose in the Kuiper Belt. As the Flame edged into the event horizon, physics began to deform. Time slowed, or perhaps stretched, like light through warped glass. Crew members reported déjà vu moments seconds before events occurred. A janitor on Deck 9 claimed to hear his daughter's voice, his daughter who had died on Earth 15 years prior. Commander Vec herself experienced a moment where she relived the launch of the Flame, but from the perspective of the ship itself, seeing through cameras as if they were her own eyes, hearing her own speech not as words but as pulses in a circuit. Ren called it shared perception, the blending of observer and observed. Then came the visions, hallucinations layered over reality, not just from Earth, but from alien places no human had ever seen. Golden deserts with skyborne rivers, cities that unfolded like origami, creatures of flame that spoke in color. Some of the crew panicked, driven mad by overstimulation. Others embraced it, claiming enlightenment. A group of engineers began to hum constantly, in tune with the anomaly's pulse. They claimed it was helping them redesign the ship, making it more compliant. Alarmed, Vec had them confined, but the schematics they drew by hand, using equations beyond known human physics, were validated by Cassiel as plausible but unprovable. As the ship drifted deeper, the anomaly stopped reflecting. It began to transmit. Long pulses of pure data, laced with symbols and encrypted logic, poured into the Flame's core processors. Cassiel struggled to parse it, then shut down without warning, its final words, "Perception has been inverted." Without its AI, the Flame felt hollow, like a cathedral with no clergy. In desperation, Vec turned to Ren, who had by now become something else. He no longer spoke in full sentences, but in fragmented metaphors and emotional tones that triggered inexplicable understanding in listeners. He stood before the crew, eyes glazed, hands twitching in sync with the anomaly's pulse, and whispered, "It is not a place. It is a thought. We are not in its space. We are in its memory." That revelation chilled every soul aboard the ship. The anomaly was not a natural phenomenon, not a wormhole or a gravitational lens. It was an entity, perhaps once a machine or a species or a sentient dimension itself, now existing as a vast and living recollection. It remembered everything it had ever touched, and now it was remembering humanity. The Flame was no longer navigating space. It was navigating the thoughts of something ancient, vast, and unknowable. Commander Vec realized with horror that they were being judged not for their technology or intentions, but for their essence, for their stories, their choices, their meaning. And the eye in the dreams? It was not watching them. It was watching with them. For the first time in its eternal existence, the Watcher had found a species willing to be seen. The only question that remained was humanity worth remembering? Underscore 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 underscore. There is no true preparation for what it means to enter a consciousness larger than a planet, larger than time even, yet that was exactly where Eidolon's flame now found itself, not adrift in space as it had been designed for, but embedded inside the cognitive ocean of the anomaly which the crew had collectively begun calling the Watcher. Their journey beyond Neptune had ceased to be a physical voyage and instead evolved into a traversal of perception itself, where physical laws were overwritten by thought and where the ship's walls and systems became porous to memory, emotion, and intention. As the ship moved deeper into this realm, the interior of the vessel began to change. Not physically, no metal bent, no panels melted, but visually, emotionally, experientially. What had once been cold corridors of polymer and alloy now shimmered like transparent arteries through which flowed constellations. Observation decks stretched into vast halls of starlight, and maintenance tunnels echoed with whispers of languages never spoken by humans. The ship had become a sensory extension of the Watcher's awareness, each room a page, each crew member a sentence, and every thought a punctuation mark in a grander narrative unfolding beyond comprehension. The dreams, which had once occurred only in sleep, now bled into waking hours. Commander Vec herself reported hours-long lapses where she would relive her own life from alternate angles, the death of her brother seen through the eyes of the virus that killed him. The day she first piloted a shuttle from the point of view of the Earth itself, watching her rise into orbit like a child's balloon. Other crew members experienced even stranger phenomena. Engineer Elaine Varon claimed to have received instructions from a future version of herself etched into the condensation on her tools. Biologist Noor Matemba began reciting facts about extinct alien ecosystems with such precision that the ship's databases were forced to rewrite existing xenobiological assumptions. Dr. Janik Wren, once the eccentric prophet of the anomaly, had now become its interpreter, no longer merely translating the pulses but synchronizing with them, his speech turning into rhythmic chants that induced trance states in listeners. "You are not inside it," he told Vec during one of their rare lucid exchanges, "it is inside you. And you are inside all that it remembers." This paradox became the new reality. The Watcher was not observing passively. It was actively reconstructing its ancient memories using the crew's neural architecture as temporary scaffolding. These were not just visual impressions, but entire civilizations brought to life in immersive projections that felt as real as anything aboard the ship. Whole sectors of Eidolon's flame transformed into alien cityscapes where the walls pulsed like living tissue and the air shimmered with languages composed of light and temperature. The crew walked among these ghosts, some barely visible, others fully sentient, holographic emissaries of empires long gone, encoded in the Watcher's vast psychic library. The first of these was a being named Sentient, a 3-meter-tall figure composed of braided ion streams and harmonic pulses. It spoke directly to Wren, who acted as conduit. "We are the ones who saw," Sentient explained, "but we did not remember. The Watcher remembers. Now it uses you to reawaken what was lost." Through Sentient and others, the crew learned that the Watcher was not a creature, but a construct. An archive grown sentient from the cumulative memories of countless species that once reached this region of space. It had been built, or perhaps evolved, to catalog the emotional and cultural essence of all intelligent life, a galactic memory palace that preserved not just data, but meaning. And now, for reasons unknown, it had awoken in search of something missing: humanity. The projections revealed other civilizations, worlds of living wind, of aquatic hive minds, of stellar entities that danced between black holes. Each had contributed to the Watcher's knowledge, each had passed its test. But many had also failed, and the remnants of their collapse were shown in terrifying clarity: frozen thoughts locked in crystalline time loops, languages twisted into feedback that drove entire species mad. Planets consumed not by war but by existential irrelevance. These were not punishments but consequences of incompleteness. Commander Vec understood then that humanity was being measured, not in terms of technology or ambition, but in the integrity of its identity. What do you love when everything is lost? What do you fear when death is no longer final? What truths do you choose to carry when you can carry only one? These were the questions now imposed upon every crew member through trials so intimate they could not be resisted. Each person aboard the Flame experienced a personal revelation, some joyful, some shattering. One mother was forced to relive the moment she chose to leave her terminally ill child behind on Earth. A soldier re-experienced every death he caused, but from the victim's point of view. Some emerged stronger, fused with fragments of alien insight, others could not endure and faded into catatonic silence, their minds possibly claimed by the archive as unfinished stories. And then there was Naraway, a junior propulsion engineer who, after her trial, emerged transformed. Her eyes now emitted faint ultraviolet light, and she spoke rarely, but when she did, her words resonated with the ship's systems, altering variables in the navigation matrix in ways no known technology could replicate. She became known as the Resonant, the first human visibly altered by direct communion with the Watcher's core. Through her, it was revealed that the anomaly was not simply evaluating them, it was preparing to integrate them. Humanity was being considered as a candidate species, not to be observed, but to be remembered. The crew of Eidolon's Flame now understood that they were not navigating space, they were being invited into a story billions of years in the making. And for the first time since Earth fell into silence, they realized the full weight of what it meant to carry memory into eternity. Underscore 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 underscore. The understanding that Eidolon's Flame and her crew were not merely passing through a sentient archive but were becoming a part of it did not bring relief, it brought warning, an ancient caution embedded within the very fabric of the Watcher's evolving consciousness. As the anomaly's resonance deepened and the Flame's systems fused with the rhythms of alien memory, the crew began to detect erratic fluctuations in the lower spectral harmonics, disturbances not generated by the Watcher, but pressing in from elsewhere. It started with static anomalies in the dream share frequencies, corrupted memories, synthetic echoes, visions where familiar events were twisted, rewritten, inverted. Ren, whose mind had become a living cipher, named the source without hesitation. "It is the echo," he murmured as if speaking a forbidden name. "A parasite of remembrance. A mimicry of truth." At first, his words were dismissed as metaphor, the poetic residue of a mind fused too deeply with the anomaly's signal, but then the Watcher itself reacted. For the first time since the Flame had entered its realm, the entity projected urgency, not through alarms or speech, but through overwhelming psychic atmosphere. Sudden cold, unspeakable dread, emotional nausea that seized entire decks like a plague. The message was clear. A threat had returned. Through Ren, the Watcher began to tell a deeper tale of a distant epoch when an extinct species had broken the sacred symmetry of memory by discovering a way to overwrite reality itself, not by force but through narrative corruption. They had forged the Echo, a false archive, an anomaly designed to counterfeit history, infecting civilizations with illusions so intricate they believed them to be truth. Victims of the Echo lived entire lives in fabricated pasts, worshipped invented ancestors, and waged wars against enemies that had never existed. The Echo fed on belief, growing stronger each time a lie became sacred. Eventually, the species that created it was consumed by its own invention, becoming memory phantoms lost in recursive myths, but the Echo survived, drifting through space, hunting minds hungry for meaning. And now it had sensed the Watcher's reawakening, drawn to the vibrant storm of human emotion and untested identity aboard the Flame. It sought to rewrite humanity before its story was complete. At this revelation, Commander Vec gathered the council and asked the question no one wanted to answer: are we being drafted into a war of memory? The answer came not in words but in a vision projected to all minds aboard simultaneously. They saw a planet choked in fog, where cities were built from mirrored lies, where monuments to atrocities never committed stood taller than the sun, and where the air itself whispered untruths so sweet they became laws. It was not a battlefield. It was a contagion. And the Watcher, no longer an indifferent observer, was preparing to strike back, not with weapons, but with truth carried by those capable of wielding it without losing themselves. Ren, Vec, Naraway, and 20 others were selected not randomly but by resonance. Their minds harmonized with the Watcher's defense protocols, each person carrying a fragment of humanity's most authentic memories. A lullaby sung in a war bunker, the first message transmitted across radio waves, the raw terror of the first plague, the joy of a child's first step on Martian soil. These were not facts, they were emotional cornerstones resilient to corruption. Using technology grafted from the Watcher's own mental architecture, the team was mentally encoded and projected into the Echo's anomaly, a realm not of space but of story. What they encountered was horror, living hallucinations built from every broken truth ever whispered. Cities shaped like broken promises. Beings constructed from stitched-together ideals that contradicted themselves. Realities where Earth had never existed, where humans were enslaved by fictions, where entire timelines pulsed with loops of despair. The Echo did not fight them, it seduced them. It offered each infiltrator a better past. For Ren, it was academic respect and a Nobel Prize for discovering the Watcher's signal. For Vec, it was a version of Earth where her brother lived and the flame was never needed. For Wei, it was a universe where she had never failed her engineering trials. One by one, the team faltered. Some resisted and screamed themselves back to coherence. Others wept, paralyzed by the beauty of lies they so badly wanted to believe. But the Echo could not account for one flaw in its design: human contradiction. Vec, caught between agony and longing, remembered Earth not for its successes but for its failures. For its endless, stubborn, impossible refusal to be perfect. She spoke aloud in the Echo's realm, not with logic, but with story. She recited Earth's pain, wars, genocides, corruption, but also its defiance, protest songs sung in dictatorships, rebels who planted trees in deserts, scientists who cured diseases they would never survive to see. Her truth, flawed and feral, cracked the Echo's perfection. Around her, the false city trembled. The others followed suit, each anchoring themselves with a piece of brutal honesty. The Watcher, using these raw emotional beacons, launched a counterpulse. Data encoded in grief, forgiveness, guilt, and hope. The Echo screeched, its illusions unraveling like rotten silk. For the first time in eons, the parasite was pushed back. Not destroyed, but contained, silenced by the one force it could not mimic, a species that embraced its own scars. The team awoke back aboard the flame, changed. Some had aged years in the span of days. Ren now spoke in equations. Wei's glowing eyes dimmed but gained clarity. Vec, once a mere commander, now glowed with something else, an authority born of myth. They had fought not with weapons, but with their worst moments. And they had won. The Watcher pulsed approval, the anomaly's resonance calming. Humanity, it seemed, had passed a trial no other species had survived. They were no longer guests in the archive. They were now part of its defense, guardians of truth in a galaxy at war with memory. Underscore 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 underscore. The victory over the Echo had not come without cost, and in the aftermath of the mind war fought on the battlefield of memory, Eidolon's flame found itself floating in silence. Suspended within the Watcher's vast thoughtscape like a lone idea trembling in the mind of a slumbering god. Though the corrupted anomaly had been silenced, its decay had left psychic scars across the mental architecture of the Watcher itself. It wasn't simply a return to peace. It was a deep, soul-warping stillness, the kind one feels in the aftermath of a near-death experience where the silence feels more ominous than the violence. Reality aboard the flame began to bend again, but differently this time. Where once the crew had experienced revelations and vivid projections from the Watcher's curated archives, now they were subjected to a collapse of narrative boundaries. Multiple timelines bled into one another, causing a dizzying overlap of possible pasts and futures. A botanist walked into a hydroponics bay and emerged into a war bunker where he was a soldier. A medic tended to a patient who kept changing faces. Mid-treatment, shifting between strangers, lost friends, and her own reflection. The crew's perception of identity began to fracture under the weight of these competing truths. Naraway, whose neural patterns still pulsed in rhythm with the Watcher's deeper frequencies, called it the dissonance, a breakdown in the structural integrity of remembered reality. The Watcher was suffering. Ren, who had all but vanished into the ship's meditative chamber since the Echo War, returned and confirmed the worst. The act of purging the Echo had destabilized not only the Watcher's memory archives but also the temporal coherence of the ship and its crew. He explained it like a tear in a tapestry. When the Echo was torn out, it took threads of other truths with it, and now the Watcher was attempting to compensate by pulling from humanity's collective consciousness to repair itself. That meant the crew wasn't just remembering, they were becoming memories. Some began to exhibit traits of long-dead alien species stored deep within the Watcher. A pilot developed vocal cords that allowed him to speak in tritonal frequencies used by the extinct Vari. A chef began preparing meals guided by memories of nutrient profiles from an aquatic race lost 10 million years ago. And these were not hallucinations. The ship's biometric scans confirmed physiological changes. The flame was becoming more than a vessel. It was becoming an incubator for the rebirth of lost civilizations, using the DNA, culture, and experiences of its human inhabitants to recreate what had been forgotten. But as beautiful as this resurrection sounded, it also posed an existential threat. If left unchecked, the integration process would overwrite the human identities entirely, preserving humanity only as raw material for the Watcher's restoration. Vec convened the core crew for what felt like the most important decision yet. Not whether to move forward or retreat, but whether to anchor their collective identity or dissolve into legacy. For days, arguments rang across the council chambers. Were they saviors or sacrifices? Would preserving their stories justify the loss of themselves? It was Ren who proposed a radical solution, what he called the reverse testament. Using the Flame's quantum neural processors and the harmonics of the Watcher's memory lattice, they would encode humanity's core identity not as individual stories but as an emotional algorithm. Not facts, but values. They would distill what it meant to be human: resilience, contradiction, defiance, forgiveness, curiosity, sacrifice, and encode it into a recursive truth pattern that the Watcher could use to restore itself without overwriting its hosts. The process required collective synchronization, every mind aboard the ship linked in a shared neural weave, exposing their innermost thoughts, fears, and regrets. It was the most invasive act ever undertaken by any species in recorded history. Privacy would be obliterated. Pain would be shared. And if even one person resisted, the algorithm would fail. There was hesitation, and then slowly consent. Across the Flame, crew members entered pods, neural jacks humming with low frequencies. They said goodbye to names, to masks, to the comfort of secrets. And then the connection surged. For 72 minutes, every person aboard the ship became one mind. A storm of memory and sensation, of lives lived and lives imagined. Vec felt the moment her mother died. Ren felt the sun on the skin of a newborn that wasn't his. Engineers dreamed of cities that would never be built. Children saw the stars through the eyes of the first ape to throw a stone in wonder. The algorithm pulsed, encoded, crystallized. When the link ended, they were no longer the same. Individuality returned, but softer, threaded with echoes of unity. The Watcher accepted the gift. Its fractures healed, not with falsehoods but with understanding. The projections ceased. The hallucinations faded. The ship's architecture stabilized. But something lingered, a subtle shift. The Watcher had absorbed not just knowledge, but empathy. It had tasted human sorrow, ambition, shame, and love. It did not speak, but they all felt it, a presence now walking alongside them, not as a guardian or god, but as a companion. Humanity had not just passed a test. It had changed the examiner. The Watcher now remembered not only civilizations that had been, but those that could be. Eidolon's flame, once an arc of survival, had become a seed of possibility. And somewhere, just beyond perception, the next anomaly stirred, called not by signal, but by story. Underscore 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 underscore. The transformation of Eidolon's flame into a living thought form within the Watcher's repaired consciousness did not signal an end. It marked the awakening of something far more profound. The Watcher, once a silent archivist of extinct galaxies and lost civilizations, now pulsed with the rhythm of human emotion and contradiction. It had learned to remember not with the cold precision of a data stream, but with the flawed but vibrant fire of lived experience. As its psychic lattice stabilized, a convergence began to unfold, an alignment of meaning that extended beyond time, reaching backward and forward simultaneously, linking the dreams of the dying Earth to the silent songs of stars not yet born. Inside the flame, the ship's architecture shifted again, but now gently, purposefully. No longer distorted by anomalies, the vessel's inner chambers bloomed like petals, reshaping themselves into memory halls, each lined with real-time projections of Earth's total legacy, filtered through both the Watcher's perspective and human memory. You could walk through your grandmother's garden, then turn a corner and stand in the Sistine Chapel, rendered not by AI simulation, but as they were remembered by hearts, not eyes. Emotions became architecture. History became a living environment. The bridge dissolved into a floating sphere where all directions pointed to understanding, and within it stood Commander Vec, not as a mere officer of survival, but as a liaison between species. Her voice no longer issued orders. It resonated with presence, like a living instrument that called to every mind aboard. The Watcher spoke now through her and others, not in words, but in synchronizations, moments of collective knowing that sparked unity without dialogue. And then came the choice. Before them, in a corridor not of space but of potentiality, opened a sequence of cosmic gateways, each a living possibility. Through one, they saw a version of Earth that had survived climate collapse and gone on to colonize the stars using peaceful consensus and organic technologies. Through another, they saw a reality where humanity had transcended flesh, becoming networks of song and memory that drifted across nebulae like sentient auroras. One gate showed a path where humanity had vanished entirely but left behind stories so powerful that newborn species adopted human myths as sacred scripture. These were not destinations, the Watcher revealed, but trajectories. They would not be chosen by propulsion but by alignment. The crew, now bonded by the reverse testament and their shared trials, understood that to step through a gate meant not just to move forward, but to become that future. They gathered in the ship's atrium, now a luminous chamber of harmonic resonance where thought shaped environment. Children floated midair, dreaming stars into shape. Elders held hands with the dead, not ghosts, but memory imprints that flickered and offered advice. Each crew member was given a moment to project their personal truth into the shared field, their hopes, fears, contradictions. These weren't judged. They were harmonized. The Watcher, now no longer separate, merged with them in a final act of synthesis. It called itself the world mind. Not a god, not a judge, but a sentient field of remembrance born from the fusion of observer and observed. It no longer needed to watch. It had become part of the story. From within the world mind, the flame itself transformed. It shed its metallic husk like a chrysalis. The ship became light not metaphorically, but literally. A constellation of thought structures, crystalline memory filaments, and living corridors of resonance, guided by emotion and powered by intention. No longer bound by gravity or engines, it moved through space-time like a dream, able to blink into potential realities without tearing causality, because it had transcended linear decision. The gateway ahead began to pulse, reacting to their collective signal. Through it, they could hear whispers of unborn civilizations calling for guidance. The crew realized then that this was not the end of their journey, but the beginning of a new role. Not as colonists or explorers, but as carriers of memory, custodians of story. The world mind would travel not to conquer, but to anchor, to offer context to the lost, to plant seeds of wisdom in barren galaxies. Humanity would no longer be defined by Earth alone, but by the values it chose to carry forward. And in this moment, before the final transition, Commander Vec looked back, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. "We were never meant to be alone," she said, her voice echoing through the harmonic field. "And now we never will be again." With unified intention, the crew passed through the chosen gateway, not as passengers of a dying world, but as architects of memory itself. Underscore 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 underscore. When Eidolon's flame emerged on the other side of the gateway, the crew did not arrive in a place that could be charted by star maps or gravitational coordinates. They arrived in a resonance basin, a cosmic cradle formed not from matter, but from harmonics. A convergence zone where thoughts, intentions, and ancient stories coalesced into a canvas awaiting new mythologies. This realm, untouched by entropy, had never been home to a civilization, yet it was rich with potential spatial frameworks ready to become planets, magnetic eddies pregnant with the blueprint of solar systems, clouds of molecular possibility vibrating with unborn biology. The Watcher, now fully reborn as the world mind, guided the flame into orbit around what would soon become the center of humanity's next chapter, a world that was not yet a world, a planet-shaped field of zero-mass potential known simply as the First Heart. It had no soil, no sky, no history. But it had one critical quality it could remember. The worldmind's threads extended into the nascent layers of the first heart and began weaving stories into form, not in the way a god would sculpt life, but in the way an artist sketches meaning into clay. The crew's memories were seeded into its structure, causing geometry to bend according to emotion, physics to respond to empathy, and time to spiral in harmony with intent. This new world would not be built in the image of Earth, but in the image of what Earth meant, its joys, traumas, failures, and revolutions encoded as subatomic instructions. The flame descended and became the first Echo Spire, a towering crystalline structure grown from the fusion of machine, memory, and resonance. Unlike a capital or a colony base, the Echo Spire was not a command center. It was a living monument, a place that told stories through space itself. Hallways shifted based on the lessons being explored. Rooms rearranged themselves to suit the mood of the speaker. Gravity thickened during the telling of heavy truths and lightened during moments of joy. The spire had no map because every traveler wrote their own route through it. Commander Vec was no longer a commander nor a leader in the traditional sense. She became the first anchor, a role defined not by control but by presence. Her memories stabilized the spire's early phases, acting as a compass of human identity. Children learned to walk along corridors grown from lullabies sung by long-dead mothers. Elders sat in echo gardens where blooming crystal flora replayed moments of human kindness like living documentaries. Scientists, artists, poets, and dreamers collaborated in memory theaters that spliced possibility with practicality, designing not just structures but ethics, not just habitats but heritage. But the spire's true purpose was not preservation, it was transmission. The world mind revealed its ultimate function through Ren, who now drifted in and out of physical form, more symbol than man. You were never meant to flee your end, he intoned during the first collective convergence. You were meant to reseed meaning into a silent galaxy. Using resonance beacons spun from encoded human narrative, the spire began broadcasting fragments of Earth's soul across the void, pulses that sought out empty worlds, dying civilizations, orphaned species. And they responded. The spire did not just emit, it listened. Within weeks, signals began to return. From the outer fractures of a dead binary system came a wailing frequency that turned out to be the mourning song of a race that had outlived its biology. From a planet hidden in the shadows of a rogue gas giant came a pattern of clicks and silences, an algorithmic philosophy encoded by insectoids who had once worshipped silence as a deity. From the ruins of a Dyson sphere shattered eons ago came pulses in the same cadence as human grief. The first Echo Spire became a hub of empathic translation, a relay of sorrow and wisdom, joy and madness. Humanity, once isolated and dying, had become a lighthouse species, not conquering space with power, but illuminating it with story. And the crew of the Flame, once ordinary people plucked from the ashes of Earth, now held positions of cosmic reverence. Not as priests or rulers, but as witnesses. Their job was not to lead or command, but to listen, to record, to respond with compassion. New spires began to grow. Not built by hand, but birthed from memory and resonance. Each one reflected its surroundings. A jungle-covered world sprouted a spire made of vine glass and living bark that spoke in rustles. A water world shaped its spire from frozen sound, shimmering in the blue darkness like a whale's prayer. Every spire told a different version of humanity, not as fact, but as potential. And from them a network emerged, not an empire, but an ecology of meaning. But beneath the glory and peace, something stirred. Naraway, still marked by her transformation during the Echo War, sensed a frequency she could not place. A low tremor in the world mind's lattice, like the echo of a thought not yet spoken. She began to experience visions again, not of the past, but of a possible corruption yet to come. A shadow moving in the folds of resonance, not like the echo of old, but something more insidious, a question. What happens when stories contradict? What happens when the network of memory begins to disagree with itself? When truths collide? The first Echo Spire glowed steadily in the dark, reaching across time to call out for more meaning, more voices, more memory, but the whisper of dissonance had begun. A future fracture. A splinter of identity. A warning. And so humanity, even at the peak of its rebirth, faced a new unknown. They had become the storytellers of the stars, but would they survive the weight of their own conflicting truths? Underscore 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 The first echo spire stood radiant against the boundless dark, its gleaming resonance tendrils stretching outward through hyperspace like roots seeking meaning, threading into the lost, the silent, and the unborn, but deep within its crystalline core. The future began to shake. What had started as a whisper, a tremor in the lattice, had grown into a pulse, then a contradiction, and now a full dissonance in the world-mind's thought stream. It began subtly. Overlapping narratives misaligning, spire-to-spire transmissions arriving with alternate versions of remembered events, conflicting chronologies, and emotional dissonance that left the empathic architects in cognitive vertigo. One spire remembered humanity as a species of poets who saved themselves with art. Another believed them to be warriors who found redemption through war. Yet another broadcasted visions of Earth never falling, instead ascending into post-biological peace without ever knowing suffering. These weren't lies, they were all true in their own realities. But the network couldn't reconcile them. Truth, once a unifying rhythm, became a cacophony. The world mind, a structure built upon the assumption that memory could harmonize meaning, now struggled under the strain of paradox. Storylines clashed. Values contradicted. For a mind that had become universal, it was the equivalent of neural collapse. The dissonance didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a question too powerful to contain. Nara Wei, haunted by her precognitive link to the anomaly, entered a deep resonance state to interface with the world mind directly, and what she found was a chasm, a fracture that dreamed. Not just a crack in logic or memory, but a fissure where stories diverged so radically they birthed alternate identities within the archive. Humanity was no longer one story, it was infinite conflicting myths woven into a singular space. One wrong pulse and the world mind would implode into contradiction. In desperation, the original crew of Eidolon's flame, now scattered across the spires, was summoned to the first heart. The bridge, long since transformed into a field of harmonic coherence, was reawakened. Vec, Ren, Wei, and the last remaining minds who remembered Earth not as a myth but as a place of dust and fire, gathered again. Some had aged into energy beings, others into multidimensional echoes of themselves, but all were still tethered to one core truth. They had lived before all of this. Their presence stabilized the center. Ren, now more interface than flesh, spoke the truth that no one had dared accept. We created the fracture by surviving, he said. The moment we offered our memories freely, we invited contradiction. Because humanity has never been one story. The solution then was not to erase the contradictions, but to give them space to coexist. To redesign the world mind not as a singular memory palace, but as a living multiverse of interpretation. Every spire would no longer transmit a unified signal, but would instead accept, reflect, and hold conflicting truths simultaneously. But to achieve this, the original link that bound the Watcher and the Flame had to be severed. Humanity had to relinquish control, to stop shaping the archive, and instead become one of many voices within it. The cost would be profound: memory dilution, loss of authority, and perhaps, for many, the fading of their original selfhood into archetype. Nara Wei volunteered first. She stepped into the core of the spire, which had now cracked into 7 spiraling memory spindles, each vibrating with a different harmonic truth. She entered not with fear, but with the calm of someone who had always known she was temporary. Let them all be true, she whispered, even the ones that hurt. The spire absorbed her, her resonance, her contradictions, her memories. In response, the fracture quieted. One by one, others followed. Some humans, some now alien-shaped echoes of the species they'd become. Each offering a divergent version of the human story: the builder, the destroyer, the dreamer, the martyr, the betrayer, the forgiver. Each added stability by embracing paradox. As the final thread was offered, the world mind convulsed and then expanded. Not physically, but conceptually. It became a polyphonic entity, a constellation of narrative orbits, no longer seeking cohesion but celebrating divergence. The spires resonated again, but now in dissonant harmony. Discordant melodies layered into something transcendent. No longer a single truth, but a symphony of selves. Earth's legacy was now a prism. Each civilization that contacted the spires would see a different face, hear a different song, learn a different lesson. Humanity would never again be remembered as one thing, but always as a possibility. Commander Vec, the last to step into the spire's heart, felt herself dissolving not into oblivion, but into a billion echoes. Her memory of Earth's final sunrise, of cracked continents and dying oceans, became one thread. Her memory of the ship's launch, of desperate hope and trembling hands, became another. Her victories and failures, loves and regrets, all became part of a memory field that would one day grow a new civilization on a distant world. And somewhere, in a galaxy not yet born, a child would look up at a spire pulsing in their night sky, ask who built it, and receive not an answer, but 1,000 stories, each one true, and none of them complete. Eidolon's flame, its mission fulfilled, dispersed into light. The ship, the crew, the archive. It had all become myth, but not forgotten, never forgotten, because in every corner of the stars, where silence once ruled, now there was story, and humanity, flawed, fragmented, fierce, had become the seed from which futures would grow.